We're good to go? On air. Okay.
Okay, we're good.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Councilmember Gil Cedillo, joined by Councilmember Paul Krikorian. Today we constitute the Housing Committee of the City of Los Angeles on Wednesday, September 27th, 2017, here in room 1010, City Hall, 3 p.m. at 200 North Spring Street, Los Angeles, California, 90012. We are ready to begin the meeting. I thank all of you for your patience and indulgence. We would like to begin with public comment and general comment. Is that the order? Okay. So good. As you know the rules, you get 1 minute and then 2 minutes in total at 3 minutes. So Mr. Herman, you want to come up and address us? Mr. Wayne, you want to come up and address us? And Christopher Newton.
What? Christopher Newton? Who's Christopher Newton?
So for the record, we already know that Los Angeles does not truly offer fair housing plan. Get it? .ing. To provide tenant relocations on item 5 and 6. For once in my life, I can see you're actually doing one fucking good thing about that. Thank you to those attorneys who represent tenants. As far as number 4, landlord outreach, DBA, the company of Eberly, request for proposals of landlord outreach and education. Well, first of all, that should have started back in 2008 when the stupid motherfuckers pulled me out of my home and made me homeless. That's when you should have thought about this fucking bullshit of landlord outreach. Because apparently my landlord happens to be the city of Los Angeles when you put me before those motherfuckers in the criminal courts. Right? You remember that? Fuck you. 42 U.S.C. 1983 local entities. Then I go into item number 3 regarding, is it condoms or condom? Not a condom, a condominium conversions, sorry.
Okay.
A condom is something Weezer puts on when he has $185,000 to pay to Francine Godoy. Regarding vacancy rates for the planning area in which the case is located and has not been updated with the last 12 months. Instructing the city departments to update fucking vacancies for people like myself and others who are low income can maybe possibly navigate what is called housing. And then going to item 1 before I get into my general public comment, fuck Los Angeles Housing and Community Investment Department reports on the 43rd program, Fair Housing. Fuck you. Now, my public comment. This morning at 8:30 when I was here and I wanted to talk about housing, there was a pussy by the name of Englander of the 12th District who said I had to leave because I have a service dog. And my service dog happened to be moving his bells that sounded like my keys. So instead he took it out on me, a person with a disability. And that fucking schmuck kicked me out after 30 seconds of public comment, but I got it in. And I got it for the pussy. Keep fucking throwing people out for 1 fucking minute, asshole, and we're gonna keep coming. All of us in here today are gonna keep coming. 1 minute, 10 seconds, 1 second, we're gonna fuck you up the ass, you pussy. That's why Englander doesn't like to sit in Plum and say anything anymore, because he's a big pussy. And as Antonia puts it out, no tiene huevos el puto. So in honor of all of you here fighting for tenant rights and landlord to be fair, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wayne.
I'll defer to my colleague.
Number 7, the fair housing plan. Fuck the fair housing plan. There's no plan. The plan is to kick people out of affordable rental-controlled housing, put them in mobile homes where they can live in a van by the river. Yes, the LA River. That's what you do. Then when they're in a mobile home, you put this shit on the streets called big, oversized parking restrictions. Yes. So now, from apartments to fucking campers to the streets. Not handcuffs, keys, bitch. That's the way to do it. Number 6, Investment Department report. Tenant locate resistance. No, assistance to relocate. You want to relocate the tenants where? The fucking street in a tent. That's where they get relocated. They don't get relocated to another apartment. You know, you tear down the apartments, rebuild the projects, and rent them out to wealthy Hebrews. Yes, that's what this is all about. Fuck that. Flipping to number 1, the legislative LA Housing Community Investment Department report, 43rd year of complete fucking failure on your part. Nobody's getting housing out of this shit. And then the Department of Water and Power, a certified UN terrorist organization, yes, raising the rates so people can't afford to turn the fucking air conditioner on and off. Now we turn to the third member, Marquesi Harris Dawson. He's not here. He was here at 1:30 walking around the whole fucking 10th floor, looking for the meeting here, then over on the other side. Then what does he do? At $188,000 a year, does he come here to talk to all of you? No, he goes fucking home. Then he goes and drinks and has a prostitute and a threesome, yes. Doesn't give a shit about any of you. He doesn't attend this fucking meeting. He was right here. He looked at me, the puppet, and said, leave me alone. You're a puppet. Fuck you. You don't have a campaign donation. I don't talk to non-campaign donation, pig. And I said, I'm going to go at 3 o'clock. Fuck you, Mr. 15th place economic failure. Yes, thank you so much. Now this nice gentleman.
Mr. Newton.
Hi, I just want to talk about services, including housing, that homeless people need, and so does everyone else in this room. So I want to talk about medical care, mental health care, food, shelter, a support system, transportation, identifying information such as ID, social security cards, Medi-Cal cards, and other things that are required to get services from the homeless service providing community. A place to bathe, a place to use the bathroom, respect, consideration, internet access, telecommunications, and clothing. Every one of us here needs these services, and so do the homeless people. The point I want to make is that a lot of these services are not immediately accessible to homeless people. For example, if I don't have an identification while you have a form that gets me the ID for free, the agencies don't seem to have any way for me to get to the DMV. So how do I get the free card if I can't get to the DMV? You guys need to take a better look at the nooks and crannies of your system.
Thank you, Mr. Newton. I'll go to item 1.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Item 1, CLA report relative to amendments to the 43rd Program Year Housing and Community Development Budget. Members of the committee, Clay McCarter for the CLA's office. Good afternoon. The CLA report before you recommends an amended PY43, which is the 2017-2018 Consolidated Plan, which consists of the budget for the Community Development Block Grant, Home Investment Partnerships, Emergency Solutions Grant, and Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS Grant. The CLA report focuses on the CDBG grant, includes HSID's funding recommendations, and provides additional funding to new and existing projects. While the city received approximately $327,000 less in CDBG funds than we were expecting, an influx of additional program income and savings provides the city an additional $5.4 million, which has been added to the budget. HSID will be bringing forward another report in October that recommends additional CDBG funding based on recent program savings. We have provided 2 technical additions that should be added to our report, which have been handed out to you. They have been passed out, and we recommend the committee adopt the CLA report as amended. And with that, I'll be happy to take your questions.
Okay. Questions? We have no questions. Prepared to move the order? So moved.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Chair, would you like to take item 2 and 3 together?
I would.
Item 2, Department of City Planning Report, Los Angeles Housing Community Investment Department and DWP to report relative to possible zoning code administrative and regulatory recommendations to strengthen enforcement of the Rent Stabilization Ordinance and Ellis Act. Item 3 is also a City Planning Report, HCID and DWP, relative to amending Section 12.95.2 of the LAMC to prohibit the approval of any condominium conversions if the vacancy rate for the planning area in which the case is located has not been updated within the last 12 months, among other actions.
Might we want to hear the public comment first? Okay, let's hear public comment on these items. I'm sorry. I apologize. Awkward. Let's begin with Jim Bickhart. Jim. And Orinio Opinado. And Shital Kale.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Jim Bickhart from Councilmember Koretz's office. He was the maker of the motion in item number 3, and just for the record, the notes I gave, I turned in to the clerk earlier, refer to item number 2, but it should be item number 3. And those are what our comments are on. Regarding the demolition of housing units, Councilmember Koretz stands by his original suggestion to try to link demolition permits to the issuance of whatever follow-up project is going to go on that location. But if the committee's wisdom is to go with the planning staff recommendation number 3, which calls for the housing department and building and safety departments to amend current administrative procedures to better link those actions, he would ask that those departments be required to report back to this committee in public session to allow for a review of what they propose. Regarding recommendation B, small lot subdivisions, the council member feels the current report from city planning doesn't really address the issue he raised in his motion, which is the use of the small lot subdivision ordinance to create de facto new rental units disguised as single family homes on the multiple lots created by the small lot subdivision, and thus allowing the developer to circumvent the regulations imposed by the Ellis Act requiring that evicted tenants have a chance to get the new rental units. He's looking for a mechanism to address this issue if at all possible. Finally, on condominium conversions, the report's recommendations failed to adequately grapple with the recommendations in his motion on condo conversions from earlier this year. While the council member appreciates the effort being made to find a viable alternative for calculating vacancy rates, he agrees with the comments of certain advocates that more weight should be given to RSO vacancies and reiterates his own call that there should be a moratorium on conversion approvals anytime the vacancy rate calculation exceeds 1 year in age. The issue of how cumulative impact is determined also deserves more precision and care. At the very least, all types of land use actions that remove rental units must be counted, not just other condo conversions. Council member would also support the committee remanding this report, or at least the condo conversion section, back to city planning one last time so appropriate fine-tuning on these issues can be accomplished. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Sheetal Kale from the Inner City Law Center, and I'm here to talk about a better source of data for vacancy rates. So it is relevant to items number 2 and 3. As we know, the U.S. Census American Community Survey data does a 5-year estimate of vacancy rates from over 2 years ago, which presents a timeliness issue. So we are here to recommend the expediting of enforcement by HCID of the rent registry that was created in October 2016, which is almost a year ago, to have a much better way to track vacancy rates. Obviously, when you see a steep increase in the rent of rent stabilized units, it indicates a vacancy. So that would be a more timely and accurate way of tracking vacancy. So I understand that if it's the rent registry is fairly new in the sense that it was only created a year ago. However, the data would be more current.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Aurelio Pinaldo, member of Unidad A Sierra Club and CD9. I'm here about the Ellis Act. Ellis Act is ruining my community where I have lived for 77 years. It's also ruining Boyle Heights and the Crenshaw area. Tenants are being forced out. Please make it harder for landlords to practice Ellis. Put a cap and stop the Ellis Act that is acting for displacement and homelessness and ending many communities like it's going to do in Boyle Heights near USC with the medical part, and also in the Crenshaw line. That's happening everywhere. And I hope you fix the Ellis Act to make it better for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Amy Williams, Mark Simon, and Shane Phillips.
Good afternoon. I'm Amy Williams. I'm a staff attorney at the Inner City Law Centre. One of the primary concerns raised by the Council about the demolition approval process was when there's outstanding RSO violations. I want to draw the Council's attention to a loophole in the Ellis process where there are illegal or unpermitted units, which, as you know, house some of our most vulnerable tenants in Los Angeles. Illegal and unpermitted units are not protected under Ellis per HCID's internal policy. Where a violation is found for an illegal or unpermitted unit, the landlord is permitted to evict based on the illegal unit, and tenants are denied their Ellis rights. The landlord should be required to legalize the illegal unit or permit the unpermitted unit prior to Ellising, because at the moment, not only are tenants being denied their rights, but we're losing valuable housing stock with each illegal unit because it's not taken into account when the no net loss calculation is done for any new development. I had a case recently where 12 unpermitted units ended up as 2 in the future development. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Mark Simon. I'm, again, a tenant here once again just to talk about lobbying for a stricter enforcement of the Ellis Act. I was evicted from my home, as were all the people in my building. It was my home of 23 years. As we were moving out, the landlord was already moving people in. We literally had to avoid moving trucks. He was re-tenanting the building. It's less than 2 years. The building is now 100% re-tenanted, and there has been we don't even know the nature of the investigation. We've certainly gone down to HCID to ask to investigate this. The LA Times said this does not pass the smell test, but apparently it does pass HCID's smell test, that the building is 100% re-tenanted after in less than a year. It's almost 2 years now, but stricter enforcement, we just need it. It's absurd. It's a joke.
Thank you. Sean Phillips, please.
My comment was actually on item number 7. I don't know if I wrote the wrong number.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. I'll
Okay, thank
call
you.
you back. Carlos Aguilar. Dagan Bayless, and Jennifer, are you on this? Hey, come on.
Carlos
Sir.
Aguilar, Coalition for Economic Survival. Unfortunately, this report provides little solutions to the significant loss and displacement caused by the Ellis Act. We've lost over 22,000 rent-controlled units since 2001, with an average of 7 units per day lost due to this Ellis Act. The report suggests there is currently no real accurate and up-to-date alternative to DWP vacancy data, which has its own issues that are hopefully being addressed. So without accurate data, subdivision tract map requests should not be approved that result in condos that create further displacement and loss of affordable housing. We urge a moratorium on tract map approvals of RSO buildings until accurate data is provided as suggested by Councilmember Koretz's motion. Also, the report is missing committee instructions addressing eliminating relo assistance waiver. Action is still needed on that. But we really should be discussing capping condo conversions and demolitions, and that the council must commit to an all-out effort to get Sacramento to eliminate the Ellis Act and Costa-Hawkins. We need urgency here, and we need concrete action. Ellis must go, but in the meantime, we should be doing everything feasible to protect RSO units and prevent displacement. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Dagan Bayless. I'm with SAGE in South Central. From our perspective, we work with low-income tenants around housing rights. RSO is the most important affordable housing program that we have in Los Angeles at the moment, and the Ellis Act poses an existential threat to community stability and the long-term social health of our city. We need to freeze Ellis in those districts where the vacancy rate falls below 5%. And where there's a critical housing shortage demonstrated by the low vacancy rate. And we need, as my colleague mentioned, an annual cap on the number of Ellis evictions in the city based on a reasonable percentage of the total number of RSO units so that we're not hemorrhaging beyond an acceptable attrition. Also, many landlords, as we just heard from another gentleman, misuse the Ellis Act. We need meaningful enforcement and penalties. Perhaps something like civil forfeiture would prevent landlords from abusing the Ellis. Thank you.
Thank
you. My name is Jennifer Ganada. I'm with Inner City Law Center. The last time we were here, as we've mentioned earlier, we were asking for either a cap or a moratorium. And the reason why we're asking for this is that over 60% of the folks in Los Angeles are renters, and many of the folks can be destabilized in their housing due to the Ellis Act. What we're asking for currently is that you're protecting the naturally occurring housing, the affordable housing that occurs by not allowing for the Ellis, and that's the importance of allowing for a cap or a moratorium. In addition, in the meantime, as we're doing that, as we're doing a moratorium or a cap of the demolitions, we should also look into a vacancy tax in order to de-incentivizing the landlords from not re-renting vacant units. So in addition to not demoing, we need to re-rent these units, ensuring people have housing.
Thank you. Rand Ahrens, Joe Delgado, and Steve Diaz.
Hi, my name is Randy Ahrens. I live in a beautiful bungalow colony in Universal City Hills. It's a creative enclave that, not surprisingly, has been home to a wide array of very creative individuals, including Bobby Darin and Steven Spielberg. And these homes are also under rent control. I've lived there for 35 years, and I am currently being evicted under the Ellis Act's no-fault eviction allowance. That means I have faithfully paid my rent for 35 years, and I will be thrown out of my home by a developer who intends to destroy these 5 charming, unique homes in order to build 27 high-rent condos at double and triple the current rents, and that is something that Los Angeles does not have the luxury to afford. The Ellis Act was never intended for developers as a means to use to systematically eradicate rent control, and that is what they are doing. Please enact a moratorium on developers being granted the use of the Ellis Act when their intent is to destroy rent control and/or RSO properties. We cannot support those who only serve their own greater greed. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joe Delgado. I'm with the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, ACE. These stories that you've been hearing so far are far too common. We're losing way too many of our native Los Angelinos because of this Ellis Act, and we definitely need to be pushing at the state level to kill this bill and to remove it. We need to be pushing to make sure that we enact a moratorium on condominium conversions whenever the vacancy levels fall below 5%. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee members. I'll be brief. My name is Steve Diaz. I am with the Los Angeles Community Action Network, LA CAN. Three main important points that I feel that need to be included in this dialogue are, one, definitely the rent registry that was passed that was introduced by Councilmember Cedillo must be used as a tool and seen as a tool by the Housing Department and the Planning Department as well. It's been about a year, so there's plenty of data. We can't say that we haven't captured enough yet, so there's definitely enough data for that. Two, you can't just you need to cap, you can't just regulate a problem. Definitely you need to put in a cap for the demolition and LS conversions as well. And definitely there needs to be a moratorium until there's some sort of catch-up that can happen and put in place. And lastly, rents must be regulated after the demolition. We can't continue to sort of say we're going to do one thing and then do another, expecting that people are going to do what's right. We got to pass regulation, which is the strongest sort of point of intervention that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Parker. Jed Harrett.
Hi, how are you? I invite you to the Artist Loft Museum, Los Angeles, where I have lived and worked as an artist for 16 years in the heart of the Arts District. And I am currently in eviction proceedings with a court date on October 23rd. As the reality of how is this possible becomes, holy cow, the system is broken, I began AMLA to celebrate the question, how is this possible? They named the neighborhood after us, and now they're kicking us out. Costa-Hawkins and the Ellis Act are destroying the vibrancy of our city. Please do everything that you can to repeal the Costa-Hawkins Act and the Ellis Act. My wife, my roommates, and my neighbors are all cumulative impacts of the Costa-Hawkins and Ellis Act, and so are so many of my neighbors and students where I teach at Cal State University Long Beach. The people of our city are struggling because of these acts. They need to change.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Judd Perry. I'm a co-chair of the Housing and Homelessness Committee for the Democratic Socialists of America. And those two things are linked. Housing and homelessness, they're not separate issues. The Ellis Act, Costa-Hawkins, these things that displace and dispossess people from our city's core, which has long been becoming an exclusive metropolis for the affluent. That's what's happening right here. In the name of the free market, that's just how it is, right? People are being pushed out, and they're not just being pushed out to other neighborhoods outside the city core, they're being pushed to the streets. Thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people. I met a woman in Echo Park the other day. She was living in a tent who was evicted. She's just trying to survive, get a job, get housing. She gets threatened weekly by a homeowner with a handgun. And she's afraid to call the police because she doesn't trust them, because she's had bad interactions with the police on the street. What do I tell her? What do we tell her? Where does she go? We need to end the Ellis Act. We need to repeal Costa-Hawkins. We need to do everything in our power, every tool at our disposal, vacancy tax, everything.
Thank you. Can we get Planning, HCID, and DWP to the table to present an overview of the recommendations? Welcome back.
Good afternoon, council members.
My name is Matt Gillespie. I'm with the Department of City Planning Citywide Housing Policy Unit. Here to report on our supplemental report relative to strengthening enforcement of the RSO and the LS Act provisions. As you know, we were here, I believe, on June 3rd, presenting an initial report on a variety of items that are under planning's jurisdiction, land use, relating to demolitions and LS Act removals. A number of those items were asked to provide additional detail and follow up on, and we're happy to do that. We're going to split the issues out. There's a variety of issues. I'll be talking about the demolition issues as well as the replacement of affordable housing issues, and then I'll give way to my colleague Claire Bowen to talk about the vacancy and condo conversion issues, if that's okay. So to begin with the related issues involving demolition of housing units, Planning Department agrees this is a very important issue. We initially reported to the committee. The committee direction was asking us to look at demolition policies and what can we do around our demolition policies to delay or withhold demolition permits until the fact that a project receives an actual entitlement or a permit to go ahead with a new construction project. In doing the research for that, we learned of a policy that has existed since June 2016 at the Department of Building and Safety that does a large part of that already, not for the explicit purposes of limiting evictions or stopping demolitions. It's a CEQA-related process that, again, has been in effect since June 2016. We have further explored that policy, the ramifications of that policy, how well it's working with our colleagues in Building and Safety and the Housing Department, and have reported a bit about that and some of the limitations of that. And some of the limitations are that it's not something that's in our municipal code. It is an administrative policy, and so it may lack some of the regulatory strength that if it was embedded in the code. We've also identified an issue potentially with the timing of when that review takes place. This is essentially a waiver or an affidavit that a developer has to sign when they want to get their demo permit, and it happens at the very last step in the process, right before they receive their demo permit. And we do feel, Housing and Building and Safety, that if that was moved up in the process, that could be more effective rather than right at the very end. It would allow more coordination between Housing Department's review of RSO removal issues and what they're showing to the Department of Building and Safety, and maybe be seen as more of an integral part of the review rather than a last step to sort of get over. So we were asked to look at two options. One is to simply embed the current practice into the municipal code, and that is certainly feasible and something that could be done. It would be amending the Los Angeles Building Code to add in the ability for the department to withhold permits until such time that there's building permits or no entitlement taking place. That's been verified, and so it look probably a lot like the current policy, but just embedded in the municipal code. The other option was to take a little different tack and just focus in on limiting demolitions in cases where there's complaints from tenants, LS Act related complaints, and again, we feel that's something that's feasible. The only downside is that it relies on a complaint, and we know that not all violations of the RSO are reported to HCID, and so there would likely be demolitions that would happen without benefit of review. During the discussion with our partners, Building and Safety and Housing, we thought about a third option. Third option would be much faster and efficient. It would accomplish much of the same goals, we believe, as an ordinance. It would be simply addressing what we see as some of the downsides of the current, the timing I mentioned, the enforceability, the penalties. We believe we can do all of that through administrative means. We can move up the timing, as I mentioned. We can put more real penalties when developers essentially mislead the city. Today, the penalty is essentially you don't get your permits and we're just going to hold your permits. There could be something more affirmative. You've misrepresented a statement to the city. That's a perjury. There's additional penalties that could be added administratively that are already in our existing code. And so we essentially recommend that approach. Is something that could happen much quicker than an ordinance, and we believe with most, if not all, of the benefits. So that's where we landed on that. We were also asked to report back with regards to demolitions happening out of our small lot subdivision projects. This is a type of project the planning department created, allowing you to build essentially small single-family homes on small lots and in multifamily zones. And we were asked to look at the impact of that program on demolitions and removals of Ellis. And we were able to find data the second time. We did not have good data the first time. The data is in your report. It's essentially a 5-year period. We were able to determine there's been 131 RSO units removed as a result of future small lot projects. That's about 26 RSO units a year. That results in a total of about 62 new constructed small lot units taking the place of those 26 RSO units that are lost. And that total 131 RSO units is about 4% of the total RSO housing units lost during those years, which is about 3,000. So hopefully that data is helpful on small lots. Again, I'll defer on condo conversions and skip to the last piece, which was asking how can we extend affordable housing replacement provisions that currently apply to our density bonus projects. How can we apply that in other discretionary cases where projects are asking for large density increases, zone changes. We have some conditional use permits. We have a variety of ways where developers can request additional density. And happy to report that ordinance that does exactly that is been approved by the Plum Committee as of August 22nd and has been sent to the city attorney for form and legality and should be adopted in fairly short order. With that, I'll hand it off to my colleague Claire to talk about condos and vacancies. Sure.
Great. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Claire Bowen, City Planning Department. When we were here last in front of you, we did share with you the challenges we'd have in getting the vacancy rate information from DWP. Up until a few years ago, the department had relied on DWP through their billing rate system. They had a way of giving us vacancy rate. When they changed their billing system, they were no longer able to do that. Clearly, though, the city does need to identify a regular source of getting vacancy rates. So our data team looked at the variety of vacancy rate options that we have. We shared that in our report. There are unfortunately very few actual vacancy rate sources that meet kind of the federal standards for how you calculate vacancy rate. And what we have determined, the most reliable one is something we can report on an annual basis, which we think is important, is the American Community Survey. The disadvantage is that data, when we do make it available, again, we can update it every year. The data will be 2 years old, and it does reflect a 5-year estimate. The good part about the data, again, we can report it annually, and we can break it down by the community plan area, and we can share that information with our planners on, by spring every year. I would note that today, based on the most recent information we have from the ACS American Community Survey for the 2011-2015 time period, that there are only 2 community plan areas in the city that exceed the 5%. So already most of the city is below the 5%. And so in those cases that there is a condominium conversion, the planners would need to look at, in addition to the vacancy rate, would need to also make the cumulative impact analysis. There's a number of things that we have also done subsequent to our last report to kind of strengthen those planners' opportunities to be able to do that cumulative analysis. One is we've been working with housing, basically, and we're now to collect more detailed information on the existing tenants and the rents they've been paying, so that will help the planners with the analysis. We've also been working with housing department to actually collect more information about and do more data sharing on existing RSO units and the impacts of Ellis in those plan areas. So the planners are able to start to take a look at what have been the changes in that plan area outside of condominium conversions. We think those two things are going to be position the planners to better be able to make the appropriate evaluation.
This report is really from the planning department, but I am here to answer any questions from the housing and rent stabilization ordinance perspective.
Okay. Nope. Okay. So in your report, you laid out these options. You didn't suggest that they go concurrent, but that we address them separately. And number 3 is the recommendation on the demolition.
That's correct, Councilmember. We're saying all those options are viable, but the fastest and most equally effective could be to make some administrative changes to the current policy at Department of Building and Safety. We've discussed that with them and feel that most of what we can get out of an ordinance, we can get through just some minor changes to the form and the process. We've included a proposed flow chart, the way that would work, and can continue to work on what exactly that would look like. We'd be happy to report back if that is the direction the council would like us to take on the way that ends up looking, or the way that would be proposed to be looking. But yeah, we felt like an ordinance would not add, we couldn't think of a lot of the value that the ordinance would add that we couldn't do administratively.
You're good with that? Okay, so we're prepared to move item 2, approve City Planning Department report, and option number 3. You want me to vote on that separately or run them together?
It's up to the chair.
Okay, and then the other element of this is bifurcate the report and refer the discussion on condo conversion back to Planning Department. Instruct the department to work with the maker of the motion, Councilmember Koretz, to further refine the recommendations. You're prepared to move the items? So move, so be the order. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, item number 4, Los Angeles Housing Community Investment Department report, City and CAO report relative to a request for authorization to contract with Charles and Cynthia Eberly Incorporated for landlord outreach and education services for the rent escrow account program and utility maintenance program.
There's speaker cards on these. No? You want to take this as a consent? You know, we don't have speaker cards. We're prepared to take this as a consent.
Okay.
So move the order. So move the order.
Okay, Mr. Chair, item 5, HCID and CAO report relative to executing a Fourth Amendment to contract with Paragon Partners, Ltd. to increase the 6-month contract extension to provide tenant relocation assistance services.
Item 5 and 6, consent.
Very good.
Be the order. Okay, thank you.
Briefly, Mr. Chair, item 6 is HCID and CAO report relative to authorization of a contract with property specialists for tenant outreach. Item 7, HCID report relative to a request for approval of the City of Los Angeles assessment of fair housing plan for submission to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Okay. Thank you. So we're at item 7 now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we're on item 7 now. Okay. Mr. Diaz, Mr. Reed, Claude Reed, and Maria Gomez. Yo creo que alguien aquí no hay. Necesito ayuda. Sí, yo también.
Hello, my name is Claude Reed, and I'm with the ACE organization, and I'm here to speak about the right to counsel and the use of public land. For someone like me, certain situations that are happening that I am in need of a lawyer, or at least to give me a fair chance to kind of level the playing field. And we want the city to fund public counsel for all low-income tenants. And for the use of public land, a lot of people are in need of affordable housing, and their income is way below $30,000 a year. As for me, I've been at the Weingarten Center for the Homeless since 2014 for only 5 months. Currently, I'm living at the Mary Andrews Clark Apartments located on 3rd and Loma Drive in a single room with a toilet and a sink. The apartments have community kitchens and showers on each and every floor. I'm barely getting by on food stamps and disability of only $869 per month. I'm lucky not to be living on the street and have a roof over my head. I would like to get a place where I can live with at least having the kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom all in one apartment at a very low income rate that I can afford. At least have another chance to live independently and up on a higher level.
Thank you, sir. Maria.
Aló,
I'm going to translate.
Yes, thank you.
aló, mi nombre es María Gómez y estoy con la organización ACE.
Hi, my name is Maria Gomez. I'm with ACE.
Somos parte de organizadores y activistas para justicia de la vivienda.
We're part of an activist group fighting for housing justice.
Una coalición con más de 20 organizaciones comunitarias y abogados para trabajar y asegurar que este plan sea justo y refleje las necesidades de nuestras comunidades.
We're a group, we're a coalition of about 20 different entities fighting that the needs of our communities be heard. Sorry, I'll write it down.
Que refleje las necesidades de nuestras comunidades.
And that our community needs are reflected.
Es ambicioso y dará a las comunidades con más necesidad.
This is an ambitious plan, and the purpose is to meet the needs of the communities with the most need.
Pero específicamente voy a hablar que necesitamos más fondos de la ciudad y fondos estatales para ayudar a construir y conservar viviendas accesibles.
But more specifically, we need state funding and city funding to construct housing units that are accessible to low-income families.
Sin embargo, eso no nos dará lo suficiente y necesitamos que los desarrolladores construyan tipo de viviendas que más necesidades hay en nuestras comunidades, en las residentes de Los Ángeles.
But even with this funding, that's not enough. What we need is we need developers to build these units to meet the needs of some of our lowest income residents.
Porque necesitamos más vivienda económica y en Los Ángeles el mercado de lujo no es tan necesario. Necesitamos más viviendas accesibles porque estamos en una gran crisis de vivienda que necesitamos vivir y porque no podemos pagar tantos altos costos de vivienda en la actualidad.
We need more affordable units, not luxury units, because we're in a huge housing crisis, and we need these units to be able to afford our rents.
Necesitamos viviendas accesibles para las familias que ganamos de $30,000 al año de ingreso o menos. Eso es lo que necesitamos nosotros en nuestras comunidades. Vivienda accesible, más barata.
We need rental units that are accessible to families making less than $30,000 a year. That's what we need. We need units that are accessible to these families.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Steve Diaz, Amy Schur, and Jennifer Ganata. I'm sorry.
Good afternoon once again, committee members. My name is Steve Diaz, and I'm with LA CAN once again. Excuse me, I'll be really brief. In order for this fair assessment to really reflect and symbolize Los Angeles and the different groups of people who live in Los Angeles, there needs to be an inclusion of the city must end all laws that criminalize unhoused people. As it currently stands, quality of life crimes can impact a person's credit report, which could then impact a person's ability to access housing. As it currently stands, quality of life crimes have many, many, many implications, and most of these quality of life crimes are crimes of survival that oftentimes are forgotten, that are basic human need. So in order for there to be a truly accessible sort of assessment and really reflect what's really needed, that must be included so it reflects the rest of the city and its true sort of nature. Thank you.
Good afternoon again. By the way, it was Steve Diaz's birthday.
Okay.
So, well, happy birthday, Steve. On behalf of Inner City Law Center has been meeting with several of the housing advocates. Steve is one of them, and Amy to the left of me, as well as other folks have been talking about different policies or different policy priorities to give to the city. While the housing department has addressed some of our concerns, some language was not included in the draft that they submitted, one of them being mandatory inclusionary zoning, which we would require new housing developments to include a percentage of affordable units, and the city plan should indicate that the city will adopt a mandatory inclusionary zoning policy applicable to new for sale developments as well as new rental developments if the regarding the Palmer fix. So that's the recommendation about inclusionary zoning.
Hi, good afternoon. Amy Schur with the Community Group ACE. Yes, a large number of organizations, community groups, and legal aid groups have spent probably the last 8 months digging in deep on this housing plan and working with HSID, who has worked very well with us, I would say. But the plan includes a lot of good things, but it also has some real gaps that we want to highlight. And I think you all just got a handout that summarizes some of the key issues that we would like to see improved in this plan. Incredibly important is right to counsel. New York just passed it. We need it in Los Angeles, and we need it funded. There's now mention of right to counsel in the plan, but it needs more detail about a plan to fund it. There's a way to do it that's affordable with sliding scale for low to moderate income. Eviction Defense Network has that now and is showing it can work. To emphasize publicly owned land, we know there's been a bit of movement on this front. As many speakers before me said, minimum wage right now, $12 an hour, comes to less than $30,000 a year. We can't just forget about extremely low income when we make a housing plan. Yes, it's difficult, but it's just going to be more people intense if we don't address it. One way to address it would be to say that publicly owned land quickly gets moved to be used for affordable housing and for extremely low income folks. So those are two of the things we wanted to flag in the plan. Thank you.
I agree. Natasha Reyes, Camila Concepcion, and Bambi Salcedo. Please identify yourself for the record.
Hi, my name is Natasha Reyes. I'm an attorney with Disability Rights California. We are part of the coalition of advocates and organizers for housing justice and support the priorities that they have expressed. Additionally, we'd like to express that it's important for HACLA to proactively identify situations where a reasonable accommodation could help a family avoid termination of assistance when they have disabilities. We also want to express appreciation for the city including a mandatory threshold of accessible units in publicly funded developments. However, that threshold includes a cap that would actually prevent developers from complying with state tax credit requirements for senior housing. So we ask you to maintain the threshold but remove the cap in order for developers to be able to comply with those additional requirements. We're submitting written comments, and we thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Camila Concepcion, and I'm with Trans Latino Coalition. My comments are in regards to the HSID 300-page report. First, I want to address the fact that page 75 says, in order to ensure the needs of the transgender community are being met, the city should mandate that all of the data collection, forms, and facilities are inclusive of trans identities. It then goes on to quite literally contradict itself by repeating word for word that same paragraph on page 98, an overlooked mistake that is insulting while simultaneously proving the point that although our identity is federally protected under the Federal Fair Housing Act, we are still grossly neglected while being offered less than the bare minimum. For example, a copy and pasted paragraph in a 300-page report. Additionally, page 147 mentions a sentence which addresses the victims of domestic violence within the transgender community, explaining that those resources are often unavailable to trans people. And then on page 195 to 196, pages dedicated entirely to domestic violence resources available to those victims. Trans people are not included once. It is my request that trans community leaders and voices are included in the conversations that create these reports so that these kinds of oversights can be corrected in real time.
Thank you.
Buenas tardes. My name is Bambi Salcedo, and I am part of the Trans Latino Coalition. I am here just to really let you know that the fact that trans people is just barely mentioned in this plan is not enough. And I'm here to really ask you to really look at how trans people is included in this plan. Not only that, but also how there needs to be intentional resources dedicated to eliminate the disparities that exist within this community. We are confident that you are going to take a really good look at the 300 document and that you're going to highlight this issue because it's something that the city needs to do. It is time, and I think we all can do it together. Thank you.
Thank you. Claudia Medina, Alejandra Magayon, and Abel Gonzalez. Claudia?
Oh, hi, Claudia Medina, tenant rights attorney. There are a lot of great policies included. However, I want to speak on the right to counsel. Cities such as New York have locally funded a right to counsel program. You could have all the rights, but without an attorney to enforce those rights in court, it's basically the same as having no rights. How do I know that? When I was an undergrad, I used to go with tenants to court to help translate, and I would see that they had rights but no attorney, so it was as if they had no rights. So it's important to make legal representation accessible to low-income tenants, because otherwise there's no point in having tenant rights if they can't enforce them with an attorney in court. Thank you, and I'm going to translate for Hannah.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Abel González, yo soy miembro de ACE.
Hi, my name is Abel Gonzalez, and I'm a member of
ACE.
Voy a hablar específicamente de la tarifa de vinculación. Preguntamos en qué estado que la ciudad adoptar la tarifa máxima que es considerada factible por el estudio determinado en septiembre del 2016.
Hi, I'm here to speak on the linkage fee, and I'm here to support a maximum linkage fee pursuant to the study issued September of 2017.
Necesitamos más viviendas asequibles para miles de familias que viven con un promedio de $30,000 al año o menos.
We need units that are accessible to families that make $30,000 a year or less.
Esto es importante porque subieron el sueldo mínimo solamente en compañías que tienen más de 25 miembros.
This is important because the minimum wage was raised only for people that work in companies that have 25 employees or more.
Pero hay muchos miembros o personas en la comunidad que ganan menos de esa tarifa al año. Ellos son los que no pueden pagar la vivienda al costo actual.
But there are many people that make less than $30,000 a year or don't benefit from the minimum wage increase, and therefore we need units that are accessible to them.
Pedimos que se enfoquen en las viviendas accesibles para esas personas que dan menos del porcentaje anual.
We ask that you focus on these families that make less than the $30,000 a year.
Gracias.
Thank you.
My name is Alexandra Magayon. I'm a case manager at the Trans Latino Coalition and chair of the Transgender Service Provider Network with the Housing Committee, which represents about 30 agencies in LA County. So what I want to talk about the plan and how it doesn't include transgender and non-binary language in discrimination. And why that is important is because a lot of these facilities that are for housing and shelter facilities are either sex segregated or are run by religious or institutions, which then creates discrimination to both transgender and non-binary people. Also, there is no room or space made in these sex segregated facilities, and so I would like for to ask that you include trans and gender non-binary funding if there are no room or spaces in sex segregated facilities for them to create funding for trans and gender non-binary people. I case manage a lot of the clientele, and I call a lot of these shelters and housing facilities, and I get told that they're not being able to enter that facility because they want everyone to get along. And if somebody with a trans or gender non-binary life experience is not going to get along with everybody else, so then that's why they close the door to them. So I would also like for there to be regulation.
Thank you.
I'm not done, but I would also like
All right,
to include transgender sensitivity education to be part of this plan because it is very important as it is hopefully being something that is thought about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Señor.
I'm sorry, my name is Fabian Gonzalez, and I thought I heard my name. It was Abel Gonzalez.
Abel, but did you put a card in?
Yes. If not, I'll wait.
Here you are. Señor.
Okay. So good afternoon, Fabian Gonzalez with SAGE. We're a nonprofit organization around tenant rights, and again, there's an incredible housing crisis. I know that we've been talking about a lot of issues, but I run a tenant clinic at SAGE every Tuesdays and Thursdays. We see over 300-400 families that come through our space, and again, we're focusing on obviously the linkage fee. We want to make sure that you adopt the maximum amount of linkage fee. With the city. We definitely also want to make sure that they have a right to counsel. Can't tell you how many times we're very fortunate that Inner City Law Center volunteers and supports tenants around the evictions, and they're usually going to defend an eviction, and they don't have an attorney. So we really strongly recommend a right to counsel. The Shriver Project's been very successful. We're going to continue to support those issues. Thank you.
Joel Marrero, Fred Sutton, and Rebecca Sen.
Shall I begin?
Yes, please.
Hi. Good afternoon. My name is Joel Marrero. I'm an attorney with the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. We represent individuals and families, many of whom are veterans, families with minor children, low-income Latino and African-American families. But today I'm going to discuss the Federal Fair Housing Act and specifically practices that criminalize those who are unhoused. The Federal Fair Housing Act outlaws intentional forms of discrimination and practices that adversely impact individuals on the basis of various protected categories, including race, national origin, disability, to name a few. The city of Los Angeles has long been plagued by deeply entrenched forms of segregation that have given rise to various forms of societal ills, such as wealth gaps, health gaps, educational gaps, and of course, homelessness. So the one thing that I would like to ask is the City Council to consider practices and laws that criminalize the homeless, specifically laws that criminalize sleeping in one's vehicle and permit the destruction of homeless people's property. Thank you.
Brett?
Hello, my name is Fred Sutton. I'm here on behalf of the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. Thank you so much for your time. The goals of the assessment are laudable, and there are many strategies that we support, but there are a few items which have been included which we do not believe solve the housing crisis and will be counterproductive to some of our shared goals. Advocating for rent control expansion does not create a single unit, and in every single study shows it hinders the quantity and quality of housing. The focus should be on creation of more housing for everyone. Expanding just cause or eviction restrictions makes it very difficult for owners to effectively manage their properties, especially in nuisance conditions, situations. And eviction defense funding is increasingly being abused. And basic enforcement of non-payment of rent is now taken up to 6 months due to court delay tactics. At the end of the day, this will make owners less likely to take risk and will increase screening standards for fear they'll make a mistake. There are ways that we can work through this together through our shared goals, and we look forward to working with the city on these issues to help solve them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Rabea Sen.
Yes, hi. I'm Rabia Sen with Esperanza Community Housing, and we're part of Organizers and Advocates for Housing Justice, which is a coalition of over 20 community groups and advocates that have been helping to make sure that this plan truly reflects the needs of our communities, is ambitious, and will help people and communities that are suffering the most. In particular, I'm going to be talking about the linkage fee and about mandatory inclusionary zoning. We ask that in this plan, it more clearly state that the city should adopt the maximum linkage fee deemed feasible by the linkage fee nexus study. We can't have a fee in name only, as it will still leave thousands of Angelenos on the street or at risk of being forced into homelessness. As far as inclusionary zoning is concerned, it is critical that this be considered along with the linkage fee, that these two policies actually go together, and they certainly interact, but inclusionary zoning should be considered as being separate from the linkage fee, as it actually is going towards producing on-site affordable units, whereas the linkage fee is supporting it by actually creating a separate fund for the development of affordable housing units.
Thank you. I think it's Stu Foreman. Star Foreman. I'm sorry. It's okay. Dr. Foreman, please join us. Shane Phillips. Please.
Hi, my name is Star Foreman. I've come to the Housing Committee to ask you to please consider the plight of those of us who have fallen between the two agencies that are supposed to enforce the laws of the City of Los Angeles. Currently, I am being told both by the Housing Department and by Building and Safety that I do not fall under their purview. I am in an illegally converted unit. That unit has been declared substandard by the Building and Safety. However, it has also been a letter given to the owner of the property that he must pay relocation fees for me to move, as I should have been qualified as under the rent stabilization ordinance. However, as it's an illegal unit that has never been registered, they are unwilling to enforce their order. And when I go to Building and Safety with this problem, Building and Safety says, well, we've decided to freeze this case until you've moved out, as there's an unlawful detainer case against you at this time, even though the landlord had been ordered to stop collecting rent. From what I can tell, there is no city department willing to take responsibility for the enforcement of the laws when it comes to people who fall between the two places. I believe you need an interagency person. It could even be one person who talks to both agencies, finds the people who are not being helped by either agency, and finds a way to help them.
Thank you. Sir.
Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Shane Phillips, and I'm with Central City Association. Our organization supports the city's efforts to address housing inequities, and we want to thank HCID for bringing these issues front and center. As we wrote in our comment letter, the one goal we feel is missing from this report is a focus on reforming land use policies to promote new housing throughout the city. Because of our housing shortage and the pressure it places on rents, when one household moves, whoever replaces them must often earn a higher income to be able to afford the same home. We are all familiar with that. As data from the American Housing Survey shows, most people who move each year in LA do so for positive reasons like forming a new household, cutting commute times, or moving closer to family. This highlights why tenant protections and preservation, while essential and welcome as a part of this report, can't solve the affordability crisis by themselves, and why addressing overall housing scarcity must also be a top priority. Our letter has a number of pro-housing recommendations that complement the goals already found in this report, and we hope the city will address them. Thank you.
Thank you. Sylvie Shane.
Thank you, members of the committee. I just wanted to point out that as we look for new funding sources, a vacancy tax would be a very high priority because as we talk about creating new housing, what's being created is not being rented at the same amounts as what we're destroying. And those funding sources should go towards promoting community land trusts, which is a model that can create perpetual affordable housing in perpetuity. And beyond that, we also need to really talk about preserving our existing housing, our affordable housing stock. And one of the tools that's not being used is under CEQA with a cumulative impact analysis. And you heard earlier from the DCP that they don't have a standard for determining cumulative impact. And that's why we've lost 22,000 rent-stabilized units since 2001 with little to no analysis. Under CEQA, you could require mitigation that's not currently allowed because of inclusionary zoning limitations. Thank you.
We're going to recommend that we hold this in committee, direct the CLA to compile comments from council offices and submit comments to HCID and consultant team to include in the final draft. We would like a report back and present final plan to committee at our next meeting on October 11th. So be it.
That concludes the agenda.
That concludes the agenda. Motion is in order for... Motion to adjourn. So be the order.